Welcome on behalf of the European Policy Institute in Skopje. I see many familiar faces in the room, and we have extraordinary interest online. Welcome to those online with us. Today's event is practically our wrap-up of the work that we did as a coordinator of the working group on access to the single market as part of the Berlin Process Civil Society Forum, which was supported by the Open Society Foundations of the Western Balkans, to whom we would like to express our gratitude. The work of this group started already in May or June. We had more than 40 organizations and experts joining us in discussions to prepare recommendations, which were presented in October at the Berlin Process Civil Society Forum. But we were wise enough to save some money at the time and to look forward to the announcement of the growth plan that the Commission had been preparing. So this is why we gathered you all at the end of December. A special thanks for both those people joining us online during their Christmas holidays and those in the room still enthusiastic enough to discuss the EU topic. The aim of this event is to reflect on where we are. We are worried that this is a that we are still on shaky grounds because the countries have been preparing their reform agendas, which are in various procedures at the moment or with the Commission. So what we hope to gather from this regional event is some wise thoughts on how can we make it work in the given circumstances and within the given limitations, but still to see it as an opportunity for the region. This panel was intended to be both regional and European, and we are very glad to have managed to succeed in that. We are grateful. We would have loved to have some of those people that are online with us, but still, we don't think that this will affect the quality of the discussion ahead. I will now end and hand it over to my colleague, Stefan Ristovski, who has been taking the lead on this work, and I would like to thank him personally for doing so over the last 6 months and over the last 3 years at EPI. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simona. Thank you from my name to everybody that took the time to come to this event, both in person and online. As Simonida said, for the sake of simplicity, we are speaking in English, as the interest online it's large, but the interpretation is available in Macedonian language for the ones attending online and here. Before we hop into the discussion, I just wanted to point out regarding our work, as Simona said, we prepared a short policy paper with recommendations on what the growth plan should look like. During our advocacy meetings and discussions with the EU institutions, we have many times heard that the Berlin process is not the place where EU policies are discussed. At the end, to have some output from this process, suggesting how intertwined these two processes are. Several joint declarations have came forward during the Berlin process, and one joint agreement on further mutual recognition of professional qualifications. During the Berlin process, the Western Balkan countries have gained commitments to work on bringing European standards in several areas. I would point out the European single payment area, facilitation and trade and transport, and most notably the establishment of the Convergence Observatory, which will serve to show how we are progressing in this regard towards the EU averages. On the other hand, the EU has brought forward the growth plan. It has 4 pillars, one which says closer integration to the single market in 7 particular areas, all that condition on progress on the common regional market, reforms in the fundamentals, and increased funding through a new facility with the proposed regulation in the current form. The idea of this event is to reflect from our region, but luckily enough, we have the opportunity to have speakers from the EU that are working from the member states and to reflect what is the view on the growth plan from this side. And now I can announce the speakers that we have. We have Drita Abdiu Halili, State Secretary at the Secretariat of European Affairs from North Macedonia. We're expecting Mr. Bojan Vujovic, Acting General Director in the Ministry of European Affairs of Montenegro. Then we have Professor Mojmir Mrak from School of Economics and Business from Ljubljana, Mr. Zolf Darvas from Bruegel, Belgium, and Corvinus University of Budapest. Then we have our Branimir Jovanovic, who's currently working at the Vienna Institute for International Studies. And back here in the room, it's Ms. Radica Koceva. We can start the discussion starting with the representatives of the institutions. The growth plan has these 4 pillars. Most notably, if for the first time of all the plans that we have heard from the European Union, the EU is ready to provide new funding, in part in grants, in part in loans. How was the plan received by the government of North Macedonia? Being not only moderator, but the citizen of this country, as a long-standing candidate, are we satisfied from what we're getting after all these years? And maybe more importantly, it's are we ready to implement all the commitments that we're going to take under the reform agendas? I think that many of us are interested to hear about how does North Macedonia progress in the preparation of the reform agenda, and if you can share the reform priorities that we have proposed to the Commission.
Thank you. Stefan, dear Simonida, dear Stefan, dear Radica, dear friends online, dear participants here in the room. First, I would like to thank the European Policy Institute for the possibility, for the invitation, for the possibility to participate in this event. Well, the reform agenda is the one thing I can say, I mean, the growth plan, one thing I can say for sure, it was not accepted business as usual. In the beginning, we heard opinions saying, well, it's another initiative, you know, it will start and then it will drag, but the dynamics was very good, accepted by all sides, by the Commission and by all VB countries. If you remember, in October, the President of the Commission, von der Leyen, during her visit to North Macedonia, announced the growth plan. First, she announced it in May. Immediately after that, in discussions between the Commission and the institutions, in November, we held the first conference with all Minister of Finances and Chief Negotiators in Skopje, organized by our Ministry of Finance, where Director Kopman presented the growth plan steps and what is expected from us and what are the next steps on the side of the Commission. Of course, we bear in mind that this is a proposal at the moment, but what we have done so far, first of all, accepting it as not business as usual, but also as an opportunity. Even that conditionality is mentioned, we don't feel it like carrot and a stick process, but rather as an opportunity and also as a bridging process, so people can feel EU or accession benefits before full-fledged membership. Is something that has been talked about for a long time. And this time the Commission articulated very well in a very concrete plan. I would also like to congratulate you, Simonida, Epi, and all colleagues who gave their efforts, suggestions, because it didn't just drop as a plan. It's something that for a long time also VB countries are discussing, wanting for more tangible results, more tangible things that people can see and feel. And taking it as an opportunity, we immediately in the government formed, also taking in consideration that for a smooth process, you need a clear structure. So the structure was formed where the process will be led or co-chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister for EU Affairs and the Minister of Finance, and then ex officio is me as a coordinator, and then we have all relevant ministries according to the priorities. In order to make the political commitment translated into concrete measures and steps, of course, all institutions nominated administration from expert level. And I would like to use the opportunity here to thank all my colleagues, because we had a very short time, of course, with the guidance of the Commission, but still the work was done within our institutions to complete an outline which was submitted to the Commission 6th of December, and that's one day before the screening process ended. Of course, there are conditionalities, and there's a reform agenda. We would like to use the opportunity, what is offered on the table. Of course, I will not go into details today, but what we have identified, of course, also with the guidance from the Commission and DG NIR, is the following policy areas: governance, where public administration reform and public finance management measures are foreseen; digital, energy and green transition; human capital; business environment; and rule of law. On the side of the projects, because as I said, those are the outlines. From January to March, together, we will work not only with the Commission, within our institutions, with all stakeholders, including the civil society and all stakeholders, especially the businesses, the academia. We will go into more concrete and detailed plan, which also will need to be translated in projects. We need to create or to establish a single project pipeline. As it was announced, part or 50% will be a direct budget support and 50% will be implemented through the WBIF. I have to say, of course, we had a lot of questions because before submitting the plan, all Western Balkan countries had bilateral meetings in the Commission, and a lot is clarified, but I have to admit, of course, the process will be a little bit learning by doing. And then we participated also in the board meeting of WBIF, where some additional clarifications were made. The time from January to March will be the timeline where we all together will prepare and go into details of next steps. And again, bearing in mind that this is a proposal from the Commission, and yet there are steps that need to be taken by the side of the Commission and EU as well, and endorsed by all member states. So this is in a nutshell what I would like to share with you. Of course, if there's further questions or need for clarification, I am open to. I would just like to also underline that we had an excellent cooperation within the region because we have a short time and we cooperated with all countries before submitting the plans. So thank you.
Thank you very much for your elaboration, Ms. Abdi Khalili. First, for recognizing the efforts of all actors to push for the European Union to provide additional support for the region and sharing some information on the process. Also, you have pointed out an interesting point for us that this will be a learning by doing process, and the clarifications are still being made. So this is still, as I understand it, not very crystallized as a process for the state institutions as well. Mr. Bojan has still not joined, but I'll go to the other speakers as well, particularly on the point that clarifications need to be made. Luckily for us, we have Professor Mojmir Mrak and Sol Darvas, who have experience on or from the EU side, so maybe they can transfer some views on how these processes are implemented in the EU or are similar. I'll start with Professor Mojmir Mrak regarding the question on the funding that comes with a growth plan and being tight or streamlined through reform agendas. We also have the economic reform programs being prepared every year. So the question is, what is your view on how this new instrument can be integrated in existing processes? And the other view that I want to hear from your side and later from Mr. Zolz as well is this a mimic to the next generation EU funding, or is it similar to existing EU funding mechanisms? And based on the experience of the member states, what are the learnings that we can take from our side?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, of course, for the invitation to join the panel. I would, prefer to be in Skopje to be able to talk there directly on the spot, but I hope this contribution, also this side, can contribute to the discussion. I was listening with a big interest what was said in terms of the work which has been done already on this new proposal, and I must say I'm very glad to hear that the countries in the region, with the assistance of the Commission, have already made a major step forward here. I'm also glad that finally we have, because I'm following what's going on for practically all 20 years, this discussion, that there are certain things, particularly on the funding side, which should be done before countries join the EU, because I remember the last case of Croatia, you had this huge increase after the enlargement, which is then, of course, makes a kind of a tsunami to be absorbed in real terms. So generally, I think, obviously, with these geopolitical changes which are going on, and I think we should also look at this initiative, in my view, in this context, in the context of new EU candidates. I very much support that the Commission came out with this proposal, and I do hope that it will really go through the procedures, particularly on that side of these 2 billion to be basically adjusted in the medium-term financial framework. But as much as you look this, I really made a kind of mimic comparison of this proposal with something what we saw in the member states after this corona, with this new generation EU facility. And here is one issue which I would like to underline. So we are talking, similarly as in the case of member states, of a unique proposal which is, if you want, temporarily. It's a once in a while proposal. It is not something which is becoming now an annual exercise. And in this respect, I'm very glad to hear that this is also taken by the countries not as business as usual, but as something really, very special, where a lot of innovation will have to be introduced. I must say, I have, of course, a lot of questions in this respect. I'm pretty sure that they were raised by the candidate countries in the Commission, but I will still like to raise some of them, because I hope that we can get kind of a reaction from the representatives of Macedonia, I think Montenegro, what the Commission was saying on some of these issues. Because there is one thing which, in my view, is very different between our RRF, so these are these packages for the member states, and now these packages for the candidate countries, that in the case of the member states, you have a very clear focus of this financial instrument on socioeconomic issues related to the COVID issues, and then to be more resistant to the changes associated with the green development and the digitalization. So it's a very clear socioeconomic focus, while here we have a focus which is on this, but we have also here a very clear link to the negotiations, to the fundamentals. And in the fundamentals, of course, we don't have just economic issues, but we have other issues. I saw this already in the presentation which was given by the representative from Macedonia, that one of the key areas is on the, let's say, on this non-economic side, which is logical. So I think that will be already a major change, major difference, which will have impacts for the other things. Another thing where I think is a major difference between the two types of the programs is that the implementation side. I read very carefully the draft regulation on this, and it is very clear here that we have, these two avenues for implementation. One is for the reforms, the 3 billion, and another one is for investments. They are of course linked, but the implementation, at least to I understand, goes into two separate corridors. One, of course, through the governments, another one, the investment one, through the Western Balkan Investment Fund. I'm very interested to see how this will then work in the implementation side. How these benchmarks and these kind of things will be then coordinated. Is it possible that you continue just on one side and not on the other? Can let's say the delays in one segment also delay the other segments? Right? Third thing, which I have really a question, which I'm very puzzled, but that is the question of the structure which is proposed for these instruments. And I hope that somebody maybe also in the panel can give me an explanation. For me, it was a surprise to see that the 3 billion, which are for structural reforms, they are exclusively from the debt financing side, while you have the investment side, which is another 3 billion, composed of 2 billion of the grants and 1 billion of the loans. I would intuitively consider this just the opposite, but I'm sure that there must be a logic, and it will be very interesting to understand this logic, which, investments, if they are good investments, they can be also financed with the debt financing if this is the structure, while for the reforms it's not that easy. Third thing, and this is just for the discussion and also maybe clarification. My understanding is, of course, and this is once in a while document, my view is that the ERPs continue to go on an annual basis. I'm sure, of course, that the next ERP will be affected. I'm talking particularly the structural reform chapter with this reform agenda. But still, I think it would be completely wrong to understand that the ERPs are now put kind of on site. If you look at even the member states, we continue to do in the context of the annual European semester. We are producing these documents on the fiscal side and on the reform side. And just the last thing for this beginning. There is one crucial difference between the ERP and, of course, this document. The ERPs were national documents, and countries have taken on board policy recommendations from the ministerial meeting. Well, I would say to the extent they were considering this appropriate, but that was a national document. Now this reform agenda will have to be agreed. I'm still not sure. I know that it is written in the draft document that to be agreed with the Commission. I'm not that sure that the Council will leave this entirely to the Commission, but this is the discussion maybe for further on. But the bottom line here is this program will have to be agreed. And I think in this context, of course, also the policy recommendations which were given in these ministerial meetings will be more important than maybe they are in ERPs, at least of some of the countries in the region. So thank you for the beginning.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Pak. Three things I've taken from your elaboration. First was how the conditionality mechanisms would work when the funding is streamlined through two different streams. The other part is the allocation of the fresh funds being to the side of the Western Balkan investment framework, or it should be put to the budget support. And the third thing is the complementarity with the process, and an important point on where the decisions will lie on this, whether and what will the council role be in the adoption of these agendas, as some of the ideas that we can discuss later on. Mentioning the council, maybe our next speaker, Zoltán Darvas, coming from Brussels, can turn to one of the points that it is important to address, is that the December summit conclusions state that the Council and the European Council takes note of the growth plan, but we are aware that its operationalization is condition of the adoption of the midterm review of the multi-annual financial framework and the outcomes of the negotiations from the proposed regulations. My question on this side is, do you consider that there are political risks that can jeopardize the EU's intention to make the growth plan operational early next year? And given that you very much follow the implementation of the European semester and the policy recommendations and the whole economic governance in the EU, it would be interesting to hear also your view on how these new mechanisms can stimulate reforms and investment in the region.
Yeah, thank you very much also for the previous speakers for very insightful comments. Now, as regards your first question, whether there is a political risk that ultimately this new growth plan will not see the day of the light. I mean, some risk is of course always there, but I regard that risk very, very low. And the reason I regard this risk to be very low is for two reasons. One is that the grant component of this plan, which is 2 billion euros over 6 years, so basically a bit more than 600 million per year, is a relatively small amount compared to the annual EU budget, which is oops, can you hear me now? Okay, so what I wanted to say is that the 2 billion for 3 years is a relatively small amount annually for the EU budget.
Sorry, Mr. Zolt.
And the second issue why I think the political risk low is that the EU spends really a huge amount of money on supporting Ukraine, and are seeing there is a sense of, I wouldn't say unfairness towards the Western Balkans, but I think there's a general understanding that these Western Balkan countries are waiting for progress with their EU accession talks for decades, and the progress has been extremely slow and almost stopped in a number of aspects. By suddenly, Ukraine was clearly devastated by this war of Russia, many people dying, physical infrastructure collapsing. So certainly the EU was really wise to offer major support for Ukraine, but a little bit of imbalance can be felt that yes, we are providing lots of billion euros for Ukraine. So we also need to extend our welcoming hands towards the Western Balkan countries. And again, this 2 billion grant component is not very large. So I see the risk relatively low, irrespective of how the midterm review is going to happen. Also including whether the countries, including my own country, Hungary, what's their view on on the possible midterm review. By the way, I think Hungary is more in supportive of the Western Balkan countries, so I think it wouldn't depend on that country. Now, as regards your second question on on the comparison to the current recovery and resilience facility, I think Professor Mrak had many great points. In particular, what I really appreciate is that indeed I also find it puzzling that for the more difficult reform components, only loans are offered while the grants is going to investments. It's not a problem that the grants go to investment, but I think improvements on the rule of law and public administration reform and other crucial reforms are extremely difficult to design and implement. And getting a concessional loan is of course useful, but the loan has to be paid back. By getting grants in favor of major reforms, I think that would have provided a much stronger incentive for these countries to indeed try to tackle the very difficult things. And indeed, I'm afraid there are major reforms to be conducted. I mean, if I look at any indicator, for example, on rule of law or quality of governance, unfortunately, most of the countries in the region are ranked relatively low, so major increases would be needed. But coming back to the experience of EU countries, so what I would differentiate between two types of instruments. One is the usual European semester process, in which EU countries obtain country-specific recommendations each year. And the other one is the new Next Generation EU, including the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Now, as regards the first one, the European semester process, my overall assessment is that in terms of implementation, the record is relatively poor. So EU countries don't really like that the Commission or the Council specifies what kind of reforms the countries will have to implement. What we noticed that during the 2010s, that whenever a country was under market pressure, for example, Italy or Spain, and wanted to gain trust from the eyes of the markets, then those countries made more efforts to implement the recommendations. But for including big countries like Germany, France, and Netherlands, they didn't really care. If for a reason the recommendations coincided with the political program of parliamentary parties, then that recommendation was implemented, but otherwise they were not. Now, the Recovery and Resilience Facility is a game changer in this regard, because these milestones and targets will have to be met in order to obtain funding. So now EU countries are indeed trying to do that. Now, what we see is that they are all lagging behind. So not just Italy or Spain, but also Germany and Netherlands, and all countries are basically lagging behind. So apparently it's not so easy to absorb that amount of funding and to meet the milestones and the targets. Now, turning to the Western Balkan countries, again, Professor Mrak very nicely emphasized that this one-time growth plan is more similar to the Recovery and Resilience Facility than the usual European semester process. So again, since this is a one-time instrument, there will be conditions to meet. I mean, I would expect that Western Balkan countries will make greater efforts. But again, I see a much greater incentives for obtaining grants. So I think it mostly goes for the investment component. So I think on that side, I would foresee a high level of implementation. For whether the loans will indeed provide sufficient incentives for difficult fundamental reforms, I'm much more skeptical. So let me stop here and would be happy to rejoin the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Zols. First, to referring from what we heard, as we had some technical difficulties on the comparison on the funding that the EU is providing to war torn Ukraine, and having this instrument as a positive message, or addressing the lack of increased funding for the region. And then to turning out on maybe a more pessimistic note on what we can expect regarding the implementation of the fundamental reforms, for which we mostly advocate, as a good point that always the grants are are greater incentive for the recipients, but also pointing out that when funding is available, that the experience from the EU is that the recommendations from the EU are followed to a greater extent than compared to the ones in the European semester. Now we will turn the discussion back to representatives of our country. Even though Branimir Jovanovic works for the Vienna Institute for International Studies, he worked in North Macedonia for many years, including for the Ministry of Finance. So I will turn to him with two questions on the particularities of the growth plan. One, that the point that we didn't touch upon previously is the closer integration to the EU single market. The Vienna Institute studies have argued and showed that closer integration to the EU single market, or more opening up on the existing barriers, could be more beneficial than the achievement of the common regional market for the Western Balkan economies. So my question is the growth plan and the 7 integration areas proposed by the Commission what the Institute advocated for? And the second is your personal work has recommended that increased funding from the EU can support increase in economic growth, but also income for the region. So can the growth plan support the lowering the gap? Can it bring convergence and the investment gap that exists?
Thank you, Stefan, and greetings to everyone here. Hope you can hear me well. So yeah, I'm both here and there. So I'm from Macedonia, as you everybody know, but I live in Vienna now, and that sometimes puts me in a very nice position that I can criticize everyone, including the Balkan, not just Macedonian authorities, but also the EU. And when this plan came out first, I have to say I was very disappointed by it. My personal opinion is that it fails to deliver anything substantial. It fails to bring any change in the way the EU behaves towards the region. But I mean, it is what it is. We cannot change it too much. So let's try to be constructive at least, and to make the most we can out of it. So regarding your first question, I would say that this plan is a step in the right direction, but it's a very small step and clearly insufficient step. So what I mean by this, it's one of the issues that we have been talking about as an institute for some time, is that it's very important for the region, for the Western Balkan region, to gain access to the EU common market, basically to have the freedoms, the 4 freedoms for the Western Balkans, meaning freedom of movement of goods, freedom of movement of people, freedom of movement on finance, and all this free movement story. And it seems to be a step in the right direction, because it started talking about this. It started talking about granting access to the EU common market to the Western Balkan countries, but the access that it grants so far is very limited. It's very small. So if you look at in the details what this plan offers to the Balkans, is basically free roaming and free sending money, financial flow. So I can send remittances, I can send money back home without paying hefty, commissions to banks, or the other way around. People from Macedonia or the Balkans can send money to Europe for lower fees. Basically, that's it. Maybe some other smaller stuff. So the main issues, the main problems that the economies face here, which are related to freedom of exports, or exporting goods and services from the region, remain. So if you ask companies, the Balkan companies, what are their main issues when it comes to access to the European market, they will tell you several stuff. First, it's that you still have in general, you don't have tariffs for exporting to the EU, but you have to pass the tariff measures. So you have to pass all the procedures, the tariff procedures. So even though you don't pay tariffs to export to the EU, you have the customs procedures still. So you have a lot of paperwork, which complicates stuff for the companies from the Balkans, which makes things, you still have barriers, let's put it that way. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that you have these non-tariff barriers, meaning you have a lot of standards and documents and certificates that you have to gain in order to export to the EU. I'm not saying that you should abandon these certificates. Of course, all these standards are very useful, they are very good, but Balkan companies often don't have the resources to get these certificates. So you may have a company which actually follows all these certificates and meets all the criteria for exporting to the EU, but doesn't have the money or the technical knowledge to gain these certificates, and because of that, it cannot export. And these issues still remain. This plan is not addressing these issues. So if I try to be, let's say, constructive, the concrete areas where I think we can push for this plan to be more, let's say, better, is to address these issues. So the customs procedures, so alleviating the customs procedures and the paperwork that companies have to go through to export to the EU, and these non-tariff measures are related to to certificates and standards, meaning direct technical support for obtaining these certificates and standards, and financial support to companies. So that's about the first stuff, and then the second part about the financial part. So I mean, we hear this story about 6 billion euros additional, but so will it make any change? Well, of course it won't make any change, because we had so far this European economic and investment plan, which was introduced 2 years ago, and the size of that plan was 30 billion euros, so 5 times more than the current plan. And we all know that it didn't make any change for the region. So why would we expect that this new plan, which is 5 times smaller, would bring any change when we know that the previous one, which was 5 times bigger, didn't make any change? So that's to put it simple, in simple terms. If you look at this 6 billion euros, like many people said before, 2 million of those are grants, 4 billion are loans. I mean, loans, you already have so many loans. I mean, I'm not even sure that you can call loans a great support. It's like, a bank tells me, I will support you, I will give you a loan to buy, I don't know, whatever, new phone, and I should be happy that the bank is giving me a loan. I mean, it's kind of tricky. I would be very critical towards treating it as a serious support. So the serious part of the support is this 2 million grants. But let me put that in a perspective. You mentioned the Next Generation EU. So Croatia, which is a neighboring country to the region, has a population of 4 million people. Western Balkans have a population of 18 million people, so 4.5 times more than Croatia. Croatia has, for a similar time period, support from Next Generation EU of more than 6 billion grants. Western Balkans, which are four times bigger than Croatia, have 3 times less grants than Croatia. So that's about it. So you have a 12 times smaller support than your neighboring country. And of course, Croatia can expect to have some positive effects from this Next Generation EU. The Balkans cannot expect. So let me put this 2 billion in another perspective. So 2 billion euros, it's for a 4-year period, meaning 500 million euros for all the 6 countries per year. And the annual GDP of these 4 countries is combined 150 billion euros per year, meaning that these 500 billion euros per year are just 0.3% of the regional GDP. So how can you expect that support, which is in the size of 0.3% of GDP, to change anything in a year? That's statistical error. When GDP data come out, if you have growth of 1.5%, the first announcement, then the normal statistical error is that it's between 1.2 and 1.8. So it's nothing. It's virtually nothing. It won't change anything in the region. But then again, I don't want to sound too grumpy. What I would what I would focus on here is how to make the most, how to get, let's say, all this money to the region. And we know that absorption capacities are not very strong in the region. Everybody's criticizing the region for that. I would again say here, in a way, defend the region, in the sense that if you look at the absorption capacities of the Western Balkan countries right now, so IPA 2, if you take how much of IPA 2 was used in the region, it was around 53% or something. And if you compare that to what the new member states, the Eastern European EU member states, were using before becoming EU members, their absorption capacities were not much higher. So in 2004, if I'm not wrong, their absorption capacity was 60%. The years before it was around 50%. So even, this Czechia, Slovakia, all these countries which we usually consider to be a very good and developed countries, they didn't have much better absorption capacity before becoming EU member states. And we have also to stress that the criteria for using the money back then, 20 years ago, were much easier than they are now for the Western Balkan countries. So what we can push here for, and what we should push here is to make the criteria less strict, and let's say to make it easier for the Western Balkan countries to get this money. It's again a question of bureaucracy. Instead of all these documents, and you need to have all kind of documents in order to get funding by the EU, we have to push for making all this easier. And if we want to make, let's say, improve the absorption capacity and to get most of this money, that's the area that we should push for. A final remark from my side about this: you mentioned carrots and sticks, and will reforms and money, and will it make any change? The way I would put it is that now we have, with this new growth plan, we have more sticks, but less carrots to what we had before. So you cannot expect, of course, you cannot expect that there will be a big change now, and there won't be virtually no effect on reforms. You can have effect on reforms only if this bigger stick is followed by much bigger carrot. That much bigger carrot can mean either full participation in EU budget or strict deadline for becoming EU member state, like what many people have said, 2030 deadline, strict deadline, or target deadline for the Western Balkan countries to become EU member states. We don't have that strong carrot, and because we don't have a big carrot, I wouldn't expect any effect from this bigger stick, unfortunately. So that's all from me for now. I hope I wasn't too pessimistic.
Thank you, Branimir. Actually, behind the pessimism, there were very nice ideas on how we can improve the growth plan in terms of providing more carrots for access to the single market and actually giving benefit for the companies. You have also pointed out on the need for these companies to be supported to meet the technical standards and get all the certification needed. And as to the conditionality mechanism that you discussed on the funding, it's a good introduction for our next speaker, Radica Koceva, with technical experience within and outside of the institutions, working on EU funds, implementation of larger, smaller EU projects. So for you, the question is, what is your take? Can we speed up the reforms? Can we absorb the offer funding? And what are the main challenges?
Thank you, Stefan. Okay, thank you very much, first of all, for inviting me today to share my views and observations on this interesting topic of the growth plan. I would be glad, of course, to present what I think about it and about the questions that you have posed, primarily based on my extensive experience of 20 years in the Ministry of Finance, in the, no offense, top institution in the government, what I like to call it. And of course, these years working as international expert across the region, also supporting the national institutions. So I would first start with the challenges. In my opinion, and based on my experience, I see three challenges, main challenges here. And what is more important, I believe they are not typical only for Macedonia, but also they're common for all the Western Balkan countries. First of all, given that the emphasis of the growth plan is on the reforms, and not just the reforms, but the painful one, which are related with the fundamental aspects of the accession process, I think the core or the key point is that we have a sufficient enough commitment, political commitment and will for implementing those reforms. And I'm very glad to hear that Drita in her expression today said that the reform agenda was not taken as business as usual. And I believe this is the voice by all the other institutions involved in the government and not just for the Secretariat of European Affairs. Why I'm saying this? Because the growth plan as presented by the Commission or the mechanism for its implementation, it's quite straightforward. We will use funds only if we disburse or only if we implement reforms. And therefore, I believe from my experience, it's very important that once this reform agenda is agreed with the European Commission, those reforms are translated into the governmental and political agendas of the one who are implementing the reforms. Otherwise, I believe that if the priorities agreed with the Commission are not the priorities of the government, then there is no successfulness in its implementation. You will all agree that in the past years, not in the recent past years, but many years behind, Macedonia didn't have a good track record in implementing reforms, especially those fundamentals ones. So I believe now is the moment that we demonstrate that we are capable to do the things. Second, even if there is a political will, the second challenge is that we have sufficient administrative capacity to implement the reforms. All other speakers before said the same, but I will just put it in my context, if I may say. So I hope that you understand that we are speaking about a public administration, which on one side should implement the reforms, while it's the same public administration that needs to be reformed on the other side. Because it is very obvious that it's part of the fundamentals and it's part of all the segments which are, let's say, carrying our accession process towards the Union and the growth plan. While I have many colleagues of mine which are dedicated professionals, I believe that there is no core critical mass in the public administration to drive to be the driving force of the reforms, and this is something where the political commitment should also be placed and really emphasize the need of further strengthening the capacities of the public administration. And the third challenge, which was also very well elaborated by my previous colleagues which were speaking, is the nature of the sources of the reform and growth facility. Referring to the communication from the European Commission to the European Parliament, it was very explicitly said that the facility itself is a combination of grant funding and loans. The grant funding is up to 2 billion euros, loans are up to 4 billion euros, and already now you can see this disbalance between the grant component and the loan component. And why I'm saying this? Because I believe that our fiscal space doesn't allow further indebtedness of the countries in the proportions which was presented with the growth plan, and it was elaborated previously as well. And the second thing, I can't find the rationale why we are, for example, underspending IPA, which is much more a grant component, and shifting towards spending funds which are further indebting our country. So for me, this is something which simply really I cannot put it in my matrix. Speaking about the large infrastructure projects, you mentioned them, and they are very important, not just for the country, for the citizens, but also for our economies. So when we speak about them, I believe first I would like to mention something, how I see this growth plan and the complexity of elements which are included in the growth plan. We have the reform agenda, we have the need of accompanying the reform agenda with the economic reform programs of the countries. Countries needs to develop measures to enter the single regional market. Then we have IPA, which should be spent and should be in compliance with the growth plan. On the top of that, we have the operational program. So already a lot of elements, a very comprehensive set of elements, which requires coordination. And I'm also glad to hear that Rita mentioned and highlighted this coordination mechanism, because it's of utmost importance when everything is programmed and planned, that there is good coordination on a higher governmental level, and results of this coordination afterwards will be integrated in these programs, governmental programs, which I have mentioned. And this is how you will secure the political commitment and sufficient administrative capacity. In terms of large infrastructure project, what I would like to say is that they are very complex for implementation. My experience shows that there is a need of high dedication, there is need of political commitment, and there is need of skills and knowledge of the public administration to implement them. Those skills and knowledge could come only from the learning by doing process and supported by various mechanisms of technical support, which is made available to the public administration, but only if there is will on the side of the public administration to grow, to get these skills and to get this knowledge. Second thing, what everybody should understand in the government and the public administration is that large infrastructure projects never come without challenges. This is a rule. So you should expect them to come and you should solve them. And to solve them, you again need the political commitment and strong coordination mechanism that will coordinate all the stakeholders to implement these large infrastructure projects. At the end, what I would like to say regarding the growth plan and whether we can expect that something really tremendously will change on the ground, I'm a little bit also pessimistic, as Brane previously, that some real changes will happen on the ground. But they might happen only if our countries understand that we need to do our homework. In fact, we need to make all these assumptions which I mentioned previously coming true in order to move the things and to implement the things. If the government, if the public administration and all us stakeholders in this process understand that the European Commission has highlighted two things. We need to create reform programs in which we are going to define the reforms we need to implement, and afterwards we need to implement them in order to disburse funds. We might expect some changes. Otherwise, I don't think that something tremendous will happen. Yeah. So for the moment, that's it from my side.
Yet another optimistic expose. Okay, so to wrap up your points off, first off, I will probably want to point out that you detect that public administration reform may be the catch-22 of the growth plan. Second, on raising the issue, why should we reach out to a new facility when we're underusing existing ones? And third point, on the need for good coordination within the governments, given the many streams of adoption the EU already exist, and above all, that the political will is what stands behind underuse of implementation of funds or under implementation of already given commitments. Unfortunately, even after 15 minutes of discussion, Mr. Bojan Vujovic has not still joined. He excused himself because he's in a government session. But then we can open the floor for discussion. The first question that we have already for some time now online is related, is from Marko Tršanovski from the Institute for Democracy, I assume, yes. Is a question on directly to the representatives in the institution. This time is for Ms. Can you elaborate more on the rule of law reforms that we are going to commit? It would be good also if you can refer on some of the points that we have heard already on how do you see this new facility not giving the grants for this costly and not just financially but also politically costly reforms? Will there be a political will to implement them?
Thank you very much, Stefan. Just for the beginning, I can say with all the pessimistic remarks. I'm still an optimist. But for the record, I always say I'm not an optimist nor a pessimist, but I'm a deeply frustrated optimist. And this approach has worked so far. Just general, I took a couple of notes, but maybe just to give my opinions. First of all, that the growth plan opened a debate, a wide debate among all stakeholders. I would say the skeptics and the pessimists, of course, they're right, because sometimes it feels it's another initiative which will fade away. But we cannot have that kind of approach nor compare to other regions. Our approach was, when there's the opportunity on the table, you should take it and make the best out of it. I do understand there are challenges. Radica and I think Branimir as well mentioned, there's a need for painful reforms. There are no painful reforms. There are reforms. If we call them homework, painful, difficult, then we're not committed enough. Those are reforms that we should be committed enough, have the courage to move things forward, because not always only depends on political will, because that political will then needs to be translated into practical work. And this I will explain. I think one of the panelists also asked about the structure of how we put the structure of that will lead the process. I explained earlier, but I will just explain additionally that on our first meeting, actually the ministers were present with the technical or with the professional level at the meeting. And that's why the short time we produced the document and the coordination was very good, because first of all, there was flow of information and reforms we didn't reinvent the wheel. Of course, we based the priorities on government priorities. We based the priorities on different strategies and relevant documents that are prepared from the government, also together with the Commission. On public administration, of course, that's a big challenge. Radica, for example, it's a great loss that you're on the other side now. You used to be part of the administration, and we are facing a turnover, but part of the steps that we need to undertake is not only the reform, but also the retention policy. And as I said, not always a political will is enough. It takes more than that. It takes structural and comprehensive solution to raise or to get back the attractiveness of the public administration. I know you cannot rebuild what is gone in one day, but I would disagree that it's as bad as it is perceived in general, because I led a process of this screening, bilateral screening for 15 months in Brussels with over 100 sessions. And it was exactly this administration that prepared all the presentations. So they transferred all their knowledge into this process. And it turned out to be very efficient, because we had an agenda which we respected. And the feedback from our friends and colleagues from the Commission was very positive. Yes, we do have challenges, but I still think we have a strong base that we can build on. On the question of Mr. Troshanovsky, that we sent the document yesterday also by email. The outlines also, it's available on our web page, but particularly on the fundamentals or rule of law. So couple of, how can I say, areas are identified. On democracy is review on the electoral legislation. I would just like to add as well, also on the part of the fundamentals, the will is not reinvented, but maybe more focused and targeted reforms that we would take on board in order to move forward. So then it's the independence and quality of integrity of the judiciary, consolidate the function of the Judicial Council. I'm just going through the measure if that's okay or enough efficiency of the judiciary, and then there are measures how are forcing the next steps: fight against corruption, fight against organized crime, asset recovery, and cybercrime. Of course, I was skeptical at the beginning as well. Now I'm not skeptical nor a pessimist, but I do know it takes a lot of effort to move things forward. I mentioned earlier for the media yesterday, we presented also the reform plan in the National Council for European Integration and the Commission for European Comisia za Evropske prašanja, sorry. And there was a very constructive debate that it was endorsed by everyone. So this is a good signal that is seen as an opportunity. When I was asked with my colleagues from the region, what do you feel? What do you think about the plan? I said, I can describe what I feel, because being in the process for such a long time, I said, I feel it's like somebody is giving you a hand, but not just giving you a hand, but also taking you forward where you need to give an effort, but they also help you move forward faster. So I know it's not ideal. I'm not only talking as a politician. I have to be optimistic ex officio in comparison to my other panelist colleagues. But I do believe it's an opportunity, and I do know there will be challenges, but also I do know that where we lack expertise, we can always rely on our colleagues within this panel and wider to give us the help that we need. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you. Yeah, there are two questions from the audience, and then because of a short time, I think that we'll have to wrap up the discussion. Going back to the speakers, of course, in the back, and then to Professor Ulduna.
Thank you. So to introduce myself, I am Edina Adeze, and I'm 22 years old. I finished political sciences. So I actually have 2 pages of questions, but the majority of them were answered while you guys were talking. So I'll go with just one question. And this question was actually for Mr. Jovanovic, but since he left, I think I will have to have Ms. Drita answer this, or anybody else who might think they have an answer to it. So I know that there is a lot of internal work that needs to be done, specifically in our country. But regarding the criteria that Mr. Jovanovic mentioned, what do you think that is affecting the EU to have more rigorous criteria when it comes to Western Balkan countries? And do you think that the fact that they don't think they won't benefit much from us is one of them? What do you guys think?
Stefan, should I go or?
Thank you. I have a short, first I will give my opinion very shortly, and then I will ask the question. It's not a kind of a question, it's an issue of debate. I was involved in the preparation of this plan at a very, very early stage, before it came widely known in the country, as a coordinator of the Berlin process. And this issue was raised early as May, even before May, in April this year. Now, why? Here's this interesting point. Here in the country and in the region as well, there's widespread opinion that the biggest impact, the biggest factor of impact of EU accession upon the development of a country are the IPA funds. And we always say, funds, we need more funds, more money from EU, this will transform the country. At the very beginning, the statement and the point of view of the director of the DGNIR, Mr. Kopmans, was in the previous countries which joined the EU, it was not the IPA funds, it was the access given to them to the single market. This was the most impactful mechanism which transformed their societies and economies IPA funds were the second issue. So this is why in this growth plan, the first pillar is access to the single market. EU single market is new mechanism which was not in previous instruments, investment plan and other instruments which were we know a lot of them. I agree with this kind of thinking, with this opinion. It's true. The country has to create competitiveness and everything else to be really a part of the EU single market. Yes, it does so. IPA fund help the country, but efforts will not be sustainable. Actually, the country will become dependent on EU funds forever. So this is really something new in this plan, and I think it's positive thing. Now, I'm trying to read something between the lines with this growth plan, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but here is what I think we can debate a little bit. If there's no time now, maybe another occasion. But first of all, I think that maybe the European Commission is trying to tell us in not explicit way, implicit way, behind the lines or mimicking, that for the Western Balkan countries, the accession methodology might be changed to staged accession. Maybe. I am not very sure about it, but I think it might be the case, especially when we say that there could be or should be some kind of target 2030 for the accession. Well, that is achievable only, or maybe not only, but most likely under staged accession approach. And I don't think that EU will be really ready for this or not. I don't know whether it's good for the countries or not now. I don't think it's very bad, but it's another debate. But is this kind of the case with this growth plan? And the other issue is that, which we know from other statements of the European Commission, but actually the Commission and EU countries are looking at the Western Balkans as a single entity in a way. Okay, there are 6 countries, independent countries, and each will be judged on its own achievements and merit and so on. However, the region will become part of EU as a region, more or less. Something like a convoy approach. Maybe I'm completely wrong, but just if somebody can really shed more light on this, would be kind of interesting point. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks. As Mr. Vujovic has joined, he made time to join the event. I suggest that given that we have 10 minutes left, to give him first the space to address the panel. We have Mr. Vujovic already had fruitful discussion on the challenges, but it's good to hear the take of the government of Montenegro on how they see the growth plan, and hopefully can address it in 5 to 7 minutes, and then we can have 1 minute for the speakers to reflect in the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. And first of all, a very sincere apology for being late. Unfortunately, now the dynamics of the work of the new government in Montenegro is quite intensive. So we never know in advance for sure whether and when we will have the government session. So it was the case today, and I'm really sorry for being a bit late. I'm sure that you had a very fruitful discussion, and this is the topic that is for sure very important for the region. I have to say that, and I will try really to be very short, that the summer this year, when we heard the first rumors from the Commission that the growth plan is being formalized as an initiative, we had certain doubts, definitely from the perspective of the accession process, first of all. As always, we had discussions whether this initiative is only an additional plan, and we saw many plans of the European Commission for the region during the last couple of years, and whether actually it will have an added value for the very important economic convergence of the region. Now, when we have witnessed that the discussion is developed and the first proposal of the Commission is already there, we have a bit more optimism on our side. And we believe that this would be, beside the political importance, very important economic initiative for the region, because for Montenegro, this economic dimension of the accession process is very important. And although there is still a lot of things to discuss and a lot of uncertainties when it comes to growth plan, we have done first steps when it comes to the preparation of a reform agenda. So we have finished, and the government has already discussed twice about this very rough first draft of the document, which came also partially as a proposal of the Commission, but it was followed by a joint discussion. So we are so far enthusiastic to see how the process will develop during first quarter of next year. We believe it will be the biggest challenge to finalize fully the reform agenda, including all important discussions on certain technical parts like indicators, like performance measurement, and other things that can be very important for the future disbursement of funds. When it comes to the funds, to the envelopes, we think that this share is quite fair for the region, although the funds would not be enough really to cover all the needs still. But since this is coming as an additional envelope to the already available IPA funds for Montenegro, I think that it will for certain bring an added value. Current reform agenda in Montenegro has three policy areas, three thematic policy areas, and the fourth, which is horizontal, the rule of law. So for the thematic policy areas, we decided to support development of competitiveness, including the informality, tackling of informal economy, digital and energy transition, and green transition as well, and human capital development, including smart specialization. And of course, rule of law is somehow very important on this political level. So we developed like around 60 measures for the moment, including additional measures from the rule of law. And we believe that this will be further developed, of course, through the first quarter of next year, but it is quite a solid base for the beginning. In any case, we still have doubts about how this would be operationally developed from the Commission side. We have certain doubts about whether and in which format this will be supported by member states still in the Council and in the Parliament. But this is something which is definitely kind of task of the Commission to persuade now the member states that this is something that the region really needs. So these are, in short, some kind of Montenegrin state of play when it comes to growth plans, some our initial thoughts. And of course, like the rest of the region, we will see what specific benefits would this bring to us, but there are still many open questions, definitely. So just to take the discussion very short, since I'm the guilty one for being late, I thank you very much for the attention, and I'm of course available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vujovic, for finding the time to join the panel. As we are already approaching the last minutes of the panel, the idea is that to give the speakers 2 minutes, extending our time for 5 to 10 minutes from what it was initially planned. We thank everybody who will have the time to give the closing remarks. We'll start with Ms.
2 minutes which? No, 2 minutes altogether. Okay. I'll try to do it in 30 seconds, just quickly, because I saw a very young, enthusiastic girl, and I would like to just directly answer your question. There are no more rigorous measures for one or other country. Those are the rules that we need to follow. Sometimes they look difficult, but the conditionality is there to make forward that, to make sure that we move forward and that the funds are used as they are intended. Professor, I'm not even going to start on your debate. It's a long one. They have to organize another session, maybe under Chatham House rules, and that would be good. But here I would just like to make clear that our strategic goal is full-fledged membership. But of course, the initiatives that accelerate the process are welcomed. So we as a government are committed, and I say, let's all together own this process. I think I was short enough.
Indeed. Then we'll go to Professor Mrak, who we kindly ask to follow up on the example on short expose. Closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I will be very brief. Look, I am not that pessimistic as Branimir is, not at all. I would really go much more on the lines what the officials from the two countries said. I think, you should really use this opportunity to develop the reforms, but be realistic in the reforms, because I can tell you, we have now problems in meeting the deadlines for the reforms we set. So this one is a political issue. Another is also that you have a professional capacities to deliver those things which you would like to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zolz. Your 30 seconds, it seems, is the new 2 minutes.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. I like to follow the footstep of my colleagues and being brief by also addressing one of the questions that the gentleman in the room asked, namely whether there would be a change in the accession methodology toward the stage accession process. I mean, how you define that, but I can also view the current growth plan as a step in this direction, because what it offers is that if countries can make progress in certain areas, get certain benefits immediately, so effort and reward are common. And again, I'm also more see the positive side of this plan. For example, Brahimir very much mentioned that it's most of the things are mostly symbolic. But for example, the first pillar of the proposal is the free movements of goods, which includes improved customs and tax cooperation to streamline custom procedures and reduce the waiting times at the borders significantly. So it is one of the criticism that you mentioned is in the plan, and also the many smaller items like better recognition of qualifications, the digital single market, geo-blocking, integration into the European energy networks. I think all these are some of them small steps, some of the bigger ones, but all they point toward the more broader picture, namely towards EU accession. And you shouldn't forget that, this is my last sentence, that, the president of the European Council, Charles Michel, said that the EU should be ready by 2030 for admitting new members. Now, again, it's debated whether this is what political support is for that, but I do see a growing commitment from many European leaders towards more openness for EU accession. So if the Western Balkan countries do their homework, they can become EU members faster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zolst. We have left Branimir and Zradec. Branimir, you can go first, because we're going to the same order as we started.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll try to answer briefly, to comment briefly on the question, the first question from the audience. So I think there are a bunch of factors, several factors why the EU kind of treats the Balkans differently from the other Eastern European countries. So the first is that there is this EU enlargement fatigue, meaning that people, including people, but also politicians, realized that the enlargement process is not so simple. It brings also many challenges, especially the enlargement of some of the recent EU member states like Bulgaria and Romania, especially Bulgaria with all the corruption issues. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that EU has many internal problems. You see that they cannot decide on many issues themselves, like the support for Ukraine and many other stuff. It needs to reform, basically. It cannot continue in this way when everything, all the decisions are based on unanimity. It must reform itself. But we don't see it going on. And I think, but also I think there is a third very important reason which we should bear in mind, and that is that the EU is not just the EU, but all these big factors and countries in international politics are based on interests. So this story about common values, European values, it's, I would say, a story for little kids. Basically, it's all about interests, and the interests that the EU has from the Western Balkans, basically they satisfy them already. The interests are that they can place their products on the market here, they have access to the market. The interests are that they can open companies here, they have their FDI in the Balkans, they can do it freely. They can attract Balkan people to come to work to the EU for, let's say, lower wages than locals. So they have everything. Basically, the EU is getting everything that it can from the Western Balkans already, and without the need to give them anything more. So basically, if the EU adopts, let's say, if the Balkans get into the EU, accede into the EU, then the EU will not get anything, or will get very little in economic sense, but will pay a lot, meaning first and foremost the EU budget. So I think this is what we also have to understand, that there are economic interests behind that, meaning that we as countries, well, Western Balkan countries, should adapt our behavior, meaning that we should take this into account and think more about our interests. That doesn't mean that we should turn our back to the EU. We should, of course, continue to strive for acceding EU, but we should be much more realistic and forget about this story that EU is a panacea, that it will solve all our problems. We should focus on our homework, like many people said. We should try to make our countries better places for living ourselves, and not, let's say, wait the EU to do that. So yeah, that would be my general comment. Sorry that I cannot comment on Vancho's comments, but we can do them in person sometime.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan, for my turn. So in my closing remarks, first of all, I'm sorry that I sound pessimistic, because it was not my intention at all. But when you ask me about challenges, and when we speak about challenges, usually it sounds pessimistic. I was speaking about the same challenges when I was in the administration. I speak about them now, and I believe we will speak about them for a long time from now. But otherwise, I believe that the growth plan should be taken as an opportunity. As everybody said, Drita mentioned, Mojmir Mrak mentioned, everybody else mentioned, it is an opportunity for us, and let's use it as an opportunity. And what is more important for me is that with the growth plan for the Western Balkan, already we know that the Commission thinks about us. This is important as well. And I really hope that the next Commission will have the same enthusiasm towards the growth plan. Let's leave the growth plan as growth plan, and let's do our homework, as Branimir said, really not because of the Commission, but because of us. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. As if Branimir didn't respond to Professor Uzunov remarks, I won't respond to the last point on the new commission coming next year, yes. Which is again another debate for the event. Well, we ended up on time or a bit early. It's good that many things have been discussed. I want to just wrap up some of the ideas that we have heard. The first one is that the growth plan was discussed in a short period of time, agreed quite on executive level. Things and processes are already ongoing. It's one point that maybe not, I'm not sure if everybody took, is that the proposal for a reform agenda is already available on the Secretariat of European Affairs website. From what we hear, the governments from the region are thinking or are putting these reforms public, It's an important step to ensure transparency of the process, and hopefully the first step for openness of the process, so everybody can contribute in the implementation of the growth plan. Many challenges have been identified. Firstly, it was regarding the conditionality mechanism. There are many open questions that were raised by the speakers on how a conditionality can be implemented while processes or funding are streamlined to different pipelines, and the funding being streamlined to projects that are not necessarily the costly or not costly political or apolitical processes. The other conditionality, the most important one, is that this firstly has to be adopted by the member states as a form of regulation, and then to be further implemented. We discussed much on how much this plan can achieve. It certainly depends on the capacities of the administrations to implement the reforms. It will depend on the administration, but also it will depend on the governments. And this is a 3-year project as a facility. And if we want to show that more funding is something that the region deserves, we'll have to deliver, not only in the framework of the growth plan, but also already available funds and already open streamlines of reform processes, be that the accession negotiations that we have, some of the countries have already started, but also the common regional market, the Berlin process, and so on and so on. With this, I think that I've covered most of the open questions. I want to thank everybody that have joined the event. First and foremost, all the speakers that have accepted the invitation and took the time to be here. All the participants in the room and online, as well as our interpreters who helped facilitate the interpretation in Macedonian. Thank you once again for joining, and hope that this little discussion will continue in the next year, and after we will have the new commission. Thank you once again.